The October rain hammered Cincinnati's downtown streets with the kind of relentless fury that seemed to wash away hope itself. Marcus Thompson stood on the Roebling suspension bridge, his weathered hands gripping the cold steel railing so tightly his knuckles had turned white. At 42, he looked like a man who had aged 20 years in the past 6 months. His once proud shoulders now sagged under the weight of devastating loss, and his eyes, once bright with ambition, had dulled to the color of storm clouds. The Ohio River churned below him, dark and unforgiving, mirroring the chaos that had become his life. 6 months ago, Marcus had been the picture of American success, a respected construction foreman, a devoted husband to Sarah, and a loving father to 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jake. They lived in a modest but comfortable home in Norwood, complete with a white picket fence that Marcus had built himself, taking pride in every perfectly aligned plank. But life has a cruel way of dismantling even the most carefully constructed dreams. It started with the diagnosis. Sarah's breast cancer came like a thief in the night, stealing their peace of mind first, then their savings, and finally their hope. The medical bills piled up like autumn leaves, endless, overwhelming, suffocating. Marcus worked double shifts, took on weekend jobs, sold everything of value they owned. The white picket fence became a symbol of mockery rather than achievement. The rain intensified, soaking through his worn jacket and chilling him to the bone. But Marcus barely felt the cold anymore. Physical discomfort seemed trivial compared to the agony that had taken residence in his chest since the funeral 3 weeks ago. Sarah had fought with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cubs, but cancer proved to be an opponent that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or defeated through sheer willpower. Now Emma and Jake were staying with Sarah's sister in Columbus, their small faces haunted by questions Marcus couldn't answer and pain he couldn't fix. How do you explain to children that sometimes life doesn't have happy endings? How do you tell them that their father, who used to fix every broken toy and bandage every scraped knee, couldn't fix the most important thing of all? The construction company had let him go last week. Too many missed days, too many mistakes born from a mind consumed by grief. The bank had started foreclosure proceedings on the house. The insurance company had found creative ways to deny claim after claim. Marcus felt like a man drowning in debt and sorrow, with no lifeline in sight. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through the contacts until he found Emma. His daughter's school photo smiled back at him from the tiny screen, gap-toothed and radiant, wearing the pink dress Sarah had bought her for picture day. Marcus had taken the photo himself, kneeling down to her level in their backyard, making her laugh by doing his terrible Donald Duck impression. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he whispered to the image, his voice breaking. Daddy tried his best, but it wasn't enough. The bridge stretched out before him, connecting Cincinnati to Covington, Kentucky. But for Marcus, it had become something else entirely. A passage from pain to peace, from failure to release. He had researched it obsessively over the past week. The Roebling Bridge, built in 1866, spanning 1,057 feet across the Ohio River. A marvel of engineering that had weathered wars, floods, and over a century of progress. Tonight, it would serve as his exit from a world that had become too heavy to bear. The wind picked up, whistling through the bridge's cables like a mournful song. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about Sarah's last words to him in the hospital. "Take care of our babies, Marcus. Promise me you'll take care of our babies." He had promised, but how could he keep that promise when he could barely take care of himself? How could he provide for them when he had nothing left to give? He thought about his own father, a man who had worked himself to death trying to provide for his family during the recession of the early 1990s. Marcus remembered finding him collapsed in their garage, still wearing his work clothes, still holding a wrench. His father had literally worked until his heart gave out, and for what? So his family could struggle with medical bills and funeral expenses, so Marcus could repeat the same cycle of futility. The rain continued its assault, and Marcus felt as if the sky itself was crying for all the broken dreams and shattered promises that filled the world. He thought about the photo album Sarah had kept, filled with pictures of their courtship, their wedding, the births of their children, family vacations to places like Hocking Hills State Park and Cedar Point. All those moments of joy seemed like they belonged to someone else now, like scenes from a movie he had once enjoyed but could no longer remember clearly. A car passed behind him, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt, reminding him that the world continued to turn despite his personal apocalypse. Somewhere, people were having dinner with their families, helping their kids with homework, planning weekend activities. Somewhere, husbands were still married to their wives, fathers still had homes to return to, men still had reasons to wake up in the morning. Marcus opened his eyes and stared down at the churning water below. The drop was significant, high enough to ensure that his pain would end quickly and definitively. He had researched that too, with the same methodical thoroughness he had once applied to construction projects. He thought about the paperwork he had completed earlier that day, life insurance policy, though he worried they might not pay out, will leaving everything to the children, though there wasn't much left to leave, and a letter to Emma and Jake explaining that sometimes adults make mistakes, that sometimes love isn't enough, that they should remember the good times and try to forgive him for not being stronger. The letter was in his jacket pocket now, sealed in a waterproof envelope, along with a photo of Sarah and the kids from last Christmas. They had been happy then, genuinely, completely happy. Sarah was between treatments, feeling strong, and they had managed to scrape together enough money for modest gifts. Emma had gotten the art set she wanted, and Jake had received a new baseball glove. Marcus had given Sarah a simple necklace with their children's birthstones, and she had cried tears of joy. Now, 10 months later, that happiness felt like a cruel joke, a brief intermission in a tragedy that had been written long before they realized they were starring in it. Marcus pulled out his wallet and removed the worn photo of Sarah from their wedding day. She looked radiant in her simple white dress, her eyes sparkling with dreams of the future they would build together. He had been so confident then, so sure that love and hard work could conquer anything. He had promised to protect her, to provide for her, to be the man she deserved. Instead, he had failed at every turn. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered to the photograph. "I tried to be strong like you wanted, but I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to be a father when I feel like such a failure as a man." The wind caught the photo, threatening to tear it from his grasp, and Marcus tightened his grip. Even in his darkest moment, he couldn't bear to lose this last tangible connection to the woman who had been his anchor, his compass, his reason for believing that the world could be beautiful. Below him, the Ohio River continued its ancient journey toward the Mississippi, carrying with it the dreams and debris of countless lives. Soon, Marcus thought, it would carry him too, another piece of wreckage from a life that had once held such promise. He took a deep breath, tasting the rain and the river and the weight of his own despair. This was it. This was the moment when the pain would finally stop, when the crushing responsibility of failure would lift from his shoulders, when he would join Sarah in whatever came after life. Marcus climbed over the railing. The metal was slippery from the rain, and Marcus had to grip it carefully as he positioned himself on the narrow ledge. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from a strange mixture of grief and relief. In a few moments, the struggle would be over. The bills, the guilt, the overwhelming sense of inadequacy would all fade away like a bad dream. He closed his eyes and tried to summon the courage for the final step when he heard footsteps on the bridge behind him. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that seemed unaffected by the rain and wind. Marcus tensed, hoping whoever it was would just pass by without noticing him. He didn't want to be stopped now. Didn't want to be talked down or rescued, only to face another day of insurmountable problems. Hell of a night for sightseeing, isn't it? The voice was gravelly, aged, with the unmistakable accent of someone who had spent their life in Ohio. Marcus turned his head slightly and saw a stocky figure approaching through the rain. The man was older, maybe in his 80s, wearing a Cincinnati Reds windbreaker that had seen better days. His gray hair was hidden beneath a well-worn baseball cap, and despite the weather, he walked with the confident gait of someone who had faced down plenty of storms in his life. "I'm fine," Marcus called out, his voice barely audible over the wind. Just keep walking." But the man didn't keep walking. Instead, he came closer, stopping about 10 feet away. In the dim light of the bridge's street lamps, Marcus could see his weathered face, lined with age but alert, with eyes that seemed to have seen everything the world had to offer, both good and bad. "You know," the old man said, seemingly unbothered by the rain soaking through his jacket, "I've stood on a lot of bridges in my time, played in stadiums all across this great country, seen views that would take your breath away. But I've got to tell you, this particular view you're going for, it's not worth the price of admission." Marcus felt a surge of irritation. "You don't know anything about my situation, old man. Just leave me alone." The stranger chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and sad. "Old man, huh? I suppose that's fair enough, though there was a time when people called me Charlie Hustle." He paused, letting that sink in. Name's Pete Rose. Even in his darkest moment, Marcus felt a jolt of recognition. Pete Rose, the hit king, the man who had more hits than anyone in the history of baseball, 4,256 of them. A Cincinnati legend, a player who had embodied the blue-collar work ethic that Marcus had once believed in so fervently. "I don't care who you are," Marcus said, though his voice had lost some of its conviction. "This isn't about baseball. This is about real life and real problems that can't be solved by hitting a ball with a stick." Pete Rose moved a step closer, and Marcus could see the lines around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into thousands of stadium lights, from the stress of pressure-packed at-bats, from the weight of making mistakes that the whole world could see. "Real problems," Pete repeated, nodding thoughtfully. "Yeah, I know a thing or two about those. Lost my father when I was young. Struggled to make it in the big leagues when everyone said I wasn't talented enough. Made some mistakes, big ones, that cost me everything I'd worked for. Got banned from the game I loved more than life itself." Marcus found himself listening despite his intentions. There was something in Pete's voice, a quality of hard-earned wisdom that cut through the rain and wind. "But you know what the difference is between me and you right now?" Pete continued. "I never quit mid-game. No matter how bad the score got, no matter how many errors I made, I played all 9 innings, because that's what you do when people are counting on you." "People aren't counting on me," Marcus said bitterly. "My wife is dead. My kids are better off without me. I've lost everything." Pete was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus with those experienced eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler, but no less firm. "Tell me about your kids." "What?" "Your children. Tell me about them." Marcus felt tears mixing with the rain on his face. "Emma and Jake, 8 and 10, they're staying with their aunt now because I can't take care of them. Can't even take care of myself." "What do they like to do?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "Emma loves to draw. She's always making pictures of our family, of our house, of places she wants to visit someday. And Jake loves baseball. He's got natural talent, better than I ever was. Zara used to say he had magic in his hands when he caught a ball." Pete smiled, and for the first time since stepping onto the bridge, Marcus saw genuine warmth in the older man's expression. "Sounds like you've got 2 pretty special kids there. Emma's an artist, Jake's a ball player. Those are gifts that need nurturing, don't you think?" "They don't need me to nurture them," Marcus protested. "I'm just a broke, unemployed failure who couldn't even save his own wife." Pete shook his head firmly. "Son, I've seen a lot of failure in my time. Hell, I am failure in some people's eyes. But failure isn't about falling down. It's about staying down. And right now, you're about to make the biggest error of your life. It's not an error if it's the right choice, Marcus argued. They'll get the insurance money. They'll be better off. Will they? Pete's voice sharpened. You think those kids are going to be better off spending the rest of their lives wondering why their daddy chose to leave them? You think they won't blame themselves? You think Emma won't stop drawing pictures of family because hers got ripped apart? You think Jake won't quit baseball because every game will remind him of the father who gave up? Marcus felt the words hit him like physical blows. He had been so focused on his own pain, his own sense of failure, that he hadn't fully considered the long-term impact on Emma and Jake. In his mind, he had rationalized his decision as an act of mercy, removing a burden from their lives. But Pete's words painted a different picture entirely. I don't know how to be their father without their mother, Marcus admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know how to raise them alone, how to provide for them, how to answer their questions about why Mommy had to die. I don't know how to be strong enough for all of us. Pete moved closer, close enough now that Marcus could see the genuine compassion in his weathered face. The old ball player had played through pain, through controversy, through public humiliation, and somehow he had survived it all. You know what I learned in my 24 years in the majors? Pete said. Nobody expects you to be perfect. Hell, if I batted 300, that meant I failed 7 times out of 10, and they still called me one of the greatest hitters who ever lived. Being a father isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up day after day, even when you strike out more than you succeed. Marcus felt something shifting inside him, a tiny crack in the wall of despair that had surrounded his heart for months. But what if I keep failing them? What if I can't give them the life they deserve? Pete was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could hear the river flowing below them, the rain pattering against the bridge, the distant sound of traffic in the city. When Pete finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. Let me tell you something about hitting, son. You don't succeed by swinging for the fences every time. You succeed by making contact, by moving the runner forward, by playing one pitch at a time. Parenting isn't any different. You don't have to hit a grand slam tomorrow. You just have to step up to the plate and try to make contact. Marcus found himself thinking about Jake's last game before Sarah got really sick. His son had been playing Little League, and Marcus had been there in the stands cheering him on. Jake had struck out in his first at-bat, looking dejected as he walked back to the dugout. But instead of giving up, he had stepped up for his next at-bat with determination in his young face. He didn't hit a home run, but he had made solid contact and reached first base safely. The smile on his face had been radiant, not because he had achieved perfection, but because he had tried again and made progress. What if I'm not strong enough? Marcus whispered. Pete smiled, and for a moment Marcus could see the young man he had once been, the scrappy kid from Cincinnati who had refused to let anyone tell him he wasn't good enough. Strength isn't about never falling down, son. It's about getting back up every time you fall. And you know what? You don't have to do it alone. Those kids of yours, they're not just depending on you. They're your teammates. Emma with her artistic heart, Jake with his baseball instincts. You're not raising them by yourself. You're all raising each other. Marcus felt the grip on his despair loosening slightly. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to think about Emma's last drawing. A picture of their family standing in front of their house, holding hands, smiling. She had drawn it just days after Sarah's funeral, and at the time, Marcus had seen it as naive childhood fantasy. Now, he began to wonder if it was something else entirely. Hope. I've lost the house, Marcus said. The bank is foreclosing. I don't even have a place to bring them home to. So you'll find another place, Pete replied matter-of-factly. Houses are just buildings, son. Home is wherever your family is. I've seen plenty of kids grow up happy in apartments, in trailers, in tiny houses that were big on love. What matters isn't the address, it's who's there when they wake up in the morning and who tucks them in at night. The rain was beginning to lighten, and through the clouds, Marcus could see the first hint of dawn on the eastern horizon. He had been on this bridge for hours, lost in his own private hell. But now, for the first time since Sarah's death, he was beginning to see a glimmer of something that might eventually become hope. "I don't know how to start over," he admitted. Pete grinned, and suddenly he looked less like an elderly stranger and more like the confident athlete who had spent decades proving that determination could overcome almost any obstacle. "Well then," Pete said, extending his hand toward Marcus, "it's a good thing you don't have to start over alone." Marcus stared at Pete's outstretched hand for what felt like an eternity. It was weathered and scarred, marked by decades of gripping baseball bats and fielding ground balls, but it was steady and sure. Slowly, carefully, Marcus reached out and grasped it, allowing Pete to help him climb back over the railing onto the solid surface of the bridge. The moment his feet touched the walkway, Marcus felt his knees buckle. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the darkest hour was fading, replaced by exhaustion so profound it seemed to seep into his bones. Pete caught him, providing a steady presence as Marcus struggled to process what had just happened. "Easy there, son," Pete murmured. "You've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's going to take some time to learn how to set it down." Marcus looked around as if seeing the bridge for the first time. The rain had indeed begun to lighten, and the first pale fingers of dawn were reaching across the Ohio Valley. In the growing light, he could see Cincinnati's downtown skyline emerging from the gloom, buildings where people were probably just beginning their morning routines, drinking coffee, preparing for another day of ordinary life. "What do I do now?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from hours of emotional turmoil. "I mean, practically speaking, I still don't have a job, still don't have a home, still don't have any way to support Emma and Jake." Pete pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, the kind old-school baseball players used to keep stats and observations. He flipped through several pages covered with handwritten notes before finding what he was looking for. "You know, funny thing about rock bottom," Pete said, tearing out a page and handing it to Marcus. "It makes a pretty solid foundation if you know how to build on it." The paper contained a name and phone number: Tommy Rodriguez, Rodriguez Construction. "Tell him Pete sent you." Marcus studied the note, confusion evident on his face. "I don't understand." "Tommy played AAA ball back in the day," Pete explained. "Never made it to the majors, but he was one hell of a third baseman, smart too. He started his own construction company about 15 years ago, specializes in rebuilding homes after floods and storms. Cincinnati gets plenty of both, as you know." "But why would he want to hire me? I just got fired from my last job." Pete fixed Marcus with a look that was both stern and compassionate. "Because I'm going to tell him that you're a man who knows what it means to fight for his family. Because I'm going to tell him that you're someone who's been tested by life and is still standing. And because Tommy Rodriguez understands that sometimes the best workers are the ones who've learned the hard way what really matters." Marcus felt a flutter of something he had almost forgotten how to recognize: possibility. What if I mess it up? What if I'm still too distracted, too broken to do good work? "Then you'll make mistakes," Pete said with a shrug. "Welcome to the human race. But here's the thing about construction work. Every mistake can be fixed if you're willing to put in the effort. You tear down what doesn't work, and you build it back up stronger. Kind of like life, when you think about it." They began walking slowly toward the Cincinnati side of the bridge, their footsteps echoing in the early morning quiet. Marcus realized that he had spent so many months focused on everything he had lost that he had forgotten to consider what might still be possible to build. "What about Emma and Jake?" Marcus asked. "How do I explain to them why I sent them away? How do I ask them to come back to nothing?" Pete stopped walking and turned to face Marcus directly. "Son, you didn't send them to nothing. You sent them to family who loves them while you figured out how to be the father they needed. That's not failure, that's strategy. Any good manager knows when to make substitutions to put his team in the best position to win." "But I don't have anywhere for them to live." "Yet," Pete corrected. "You don't have anywhere for them to live yet. Tommy's got a small apartment above his office that he sometimes rents to workers who are getting back on their feet. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. More importantly, it's temporary, a place to regroup while you figure out the next play." Marcus found himself thinking about Emma and Jake for the first time in weeks, without feeling overwhelmed by guilt and inadequacy. Instead, he felt something else, longing. He missed Emma's chatter over breakfast, the way she would narrate her drawings as she created them. He missed Jake's enthusiastic recounting of every inning of every game he watched, his uncanny ability to remember statistics that Marcus forgot immediately. "Do you think they'll forgive me?" Marcus asked quietly. "For falling apart? For sending them away? For almost leaving them permanently?" Pete was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could see him choosing his words carefully. "Kids are resilient in ways that adults often can't imagine," he finally said. "But they're also perceptive. They know their daddy has been hurting, and they've been hurting too. What they need isn't perfection, it's presence. They need to know that no matter how bad things get, you're not going anywhere." As they reached the end of the bridge, Marcus saw Pete's car parked in a small lot, an old Ford pickup truck that looked like it had seen as many miles as its owner had seen baseball games. Pete gestured toward it. "Come on, I'll give you a ride. We can stop by my place so you can clean up a bit, then head over to Tommy's office. Construction crews start early, and if you're going to make a good first impression, you'll want to be there when the coffee's still hot." Marcus hesitated. The night had been so surreal, so unexpected, that part of him wondered if he was dreaming or having some kind of breakdown. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why do you care what happens to a complete stranger?" Pete smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes that spoke to depths of experience Marcus was only beginning to understand. "Because 30 years ago, when I was banned from baseball, when I lost the only thing I thought defined me as a man, there were people who could have helped me but didn't. People who could have offered a hand up but chose to look the other way. I spent a lot of years angry about that, feeling like the world had written me off." He opened the passenger door of the truck and waited for Marcus to get in before continuing. "But eventually I realized that holding on to that anger was just another way of staying in the past. The only way to move forward was to become the kind of person I wished I had encountered during my darkest days. Sometimes the best thing you can do with your own pain is use it to ease someone else's." Marcus climbed into the truck, and Pete started the engine. As they drove through Cincinnati's awakening streets, Marcus found himself looking at the city with different eyes. Instead of seeing a place where he had failed, he began to see a community where people like Tommy Rodriguez built businesses, where families like his own worked and played and persevered through difficulties. "Pete," Marcus said as they turned onto a tree-lined street in the Mount Lookout neighborhood, "what was it like? Losing baseball, I mean. How did you get through it?" Pete was quiet for several blocks, and Marcus wondered if he had asked too personal a question. Finally, Pete spoke, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "It nearly killed me," he admitted. "Not physically, though there were times I wondered if that might be easier. But it killed something inside me, the part of me that thought I knew who I was and what my life was supposed to look like. For years I was lost, angry, bitter. I made more mistakes trying to prove I was still relevant." He pulled into the driveway of a modest ranch house with a well-maintained yard and a small garden that showed signs of careful attention. "But eventually I learned something important. Losing everything you thought you wanted can be the beginning of finding what you actually need. I needed to learn humility. I needed to learn that my worth as a human being wasn't determined by my batting average or my place in the record books. Pete turned off the engine and looked at Marcus directly. Most importantly, I needed to learn that it's never too late to start being the person you're supposed to be. I spent the first 60 years of my life being Charlie Hustle, the baseball player. Now I get to spend however many years I have left being Pete Rose, the human being. And you know what? I think I like this version better. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of a hope so fragile he was afraid to examine it too closely. "Come on," Pete said, getting out of the truck. "Let's get you ready for your second chance." As Marcus followed Pete toward the house, he realized that for the first time in months, he was looking forward instead of backward. The problems that had seemed insurmountable just hours ago were still there. He was still unemployed, still homeless, still a widower trying to figure out how to raise 2 children alone. But somehow, in the space of a single conversation on a rain-soaked bridge, those problems had transformed from impossible obstacles into challenges that might, with effort and help and time, be overcome. The sun was fully up now, painting the Cincinnati sky in shades of gold and pink. It was the beginning of a new day, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus allowed himself to believe that might actually mean something. Pete's house was exactly what Marcus might have expected from a man who had spent his life in baseball. Comfortable but not flashy, filled with memorabilia that spoke to a career that had spanned decades and touched millions of lives. The living room walls were covered with photographs. Pete sliding into second base, Pete celebrating with teammates, Pete meeting presidents and celebrities. But what struck Marcus most were the more recent photos. Pete at youth baseball clinics, Pete volunteering at local charities, Pete surrounded by kids who weren't old enough to remember his playing days, but who clearly adored him. "Bathrooms down the hall," Pete said, pointing the way. "There's a razor and shaving cream in the medicine cabinet if you need them. Take your time. Tommy doesn't usually get to his office until 7, and we've got about an hour." Marcus looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and was shocked by what he saw. His face was gaunt from months of poor eating and worse sleeping. His hair, once neatly trimmed for work, had grown shaggy and unkempt. His eyes were bloodshot and ringed with dark circles that spoke to weeks of emotional torment. He looked like a man who had been living rough, which, he realized, was exactly what he had been doing. The hot water felt like a blessing against his skin, washing away the rain and sweat and tears of the long night. As he shaved away weeks of neglected stubble, Marcus began to see glimpses of the man he used to be, the man who had gotten up every morning with purpose, who had taken pride in his appearance, who had kissed his wife goodbye and promised to be home in time for dinner. When he emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, Pete had laid out clean clothes on the couch, work pants, a flannel shirt, and boots that looked like they had been worn but well cared for. "They should fit reasonably well," Pete said, noting Marcus's surprised expression. "I volunteer with a program that helps people get back on their feet. We keep a supply of work clothes for interviews and first days on the job. Consider it a loan until you get your first paycheck." Marcus changed quickly, marveling at how much better he felt in clean clothes. The simple act of looking presentable again seemed to restore some small measure of his dignity, his sense of himself as a man capable of handling responsibility. "Now," Pete said, gesturing for Marcus to sit at the kitchen table, "let's talk strategy. Tommy Rodriguez is a good man, but he's also a businessman. He's going to want to know that you're reliable, that you can do quality work, and that you're not going to disappear on him when things get tough. Marcus nodded, trying to focus on the conversation despite the surreal nature of receiving career advice from a baseball legend in his kitchen at 6:30 in the morning. "The key," Pete continued, "is to be honest about your situation without making it sound like a sob story. Tommy's hired plenty of people who were down on their luck, but he needs to believe that you're committed to turning things around, not just looking for sympathy." "What do I tell him about why I lost my last job?" Pete poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Marcus. "You tell him the truth, that your wife was dying and you were trying to balance taking care of her with working, and eventually something had to give. Most people, especially someone like Tommy who's seen his share of hardship, will understand that family comes first." Marcus sipped the coffee, feeling the caffeine begin to clear some of the fog from his exhausted mind. What if he asks about references? "My last supervisor wasn't exactly pleased with my performance toward the end." "Then you give him my number," Pete said matter-of-factly. "I've known you for about 6 hours, but in those 6 hours, I've seen more character than a lot of people show in 6 years. You were willing to sacrifice everything because you thought it would help your children. You were wrong about the solution, but the motivation tells me everything I need to know about who you are." They drove to Tommy Rodriguez's office in comfortable silence, both men lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself mentally rehearsing what he would say, how he would present himself, what questions he might be asked. But more than that, he found himself thinking about Emma and Jake, about the conversation he would need to have with them, about the slow process of rebuilding trust and family. Rodriguez Construction occupied a modest building in the Riverside Industrial District, surrounded by other small businesses that served Cincinnati's blue-collar community. The parking lot was filled with work trucks and equipment, and Marcus could hear the sounds of preparation, engines starting, tools being loaded, men discussing the day's projects. Tommy Rodriguez turned out to be a compact, energetic man in his 50s, with calloused hands and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He greeted Pete with obvious affection and listened intently as Pete made introductions. "So, Marcus," Tommy said, after Pete had provided a brief overview of the situation, "Pete tells me you're an experienced foreman looking for a fresh start. What kind of work have you been doing?" Marcus took a deep breath and launched into a summary of his experience: residential and commercial construction, project management, quality control. As he talked, he could see Tommy evaluating not just his words, but his demeanor, his knowledge, his enthusiasm for the work. "Pete also mentioned that you've been going through some tough times," Tommy said gently. "I don't need all the details, but I do need to know that you're in a place where you can commit to showing up every day and giving your best effort." Marcus felt a moment of panic, remembering all the days he had called in sick or left early during Sarah's illness. All the times his attention had wandered from the job at hand. But then he remembered Pete's words about honesty and strategy. "My wife died 3 months ago," Marcus said quietly. "Cancer. I lost focus for a while, made some mistakes, got fired from my last job. I won't lie to you. It's been the hardest period of my life, and I made some poor decisions. But I have 2 children who need their father to be strong and reliable. I need this job, not just for the money, but because I need to prove to myself and to them that I can be the man they deserve." Tommy studied Marcus for a long moment, then looked at Pete, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I've got a crew working on flood remediation in Lower Price Hill," Tommy said finally. "Houses that got damaged in the spring floods, families trying to rebuild. It's hard work, tearing out damaged materials, cleaning up mold, rebuilding from the foundation up. But it's also important work. These are people's homes we're talking about, places where families are trying to get back to normal after losing everything." Marcus felt the weight of those words. Families trying to get back to normal after losing everything. It was a description that fit his own situation perfectly. "I understand that kind of loss," Marcus said. And I understand how important it is to have people who care about getting it right. Tommy extended his hand. Be here Monday morning at 7 sharp. We'll start you at 18 an hour. Not great, but it's honest work with room to grow if you prove yourself. Pete mentioned you might need a place to stay while you get back on your feet. Just temporarily, Marcus said quickly, until I can find something permanent for me and my kids. There's a small apartment above the office. It's basic, 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, but it's clean and safe. $200 a month, utilities included. You can move in this weekend if you want. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the kindness of these 2 men who barely knew him. I don't know how to thank you both. Pete clapped him on the shoulder. Don't thank us yet. Thank us by showing up every day and doing good work. Thank us by being the father your kids need you to be. The rest of that Friday passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Pete drove Marcus to a discount store where he used his last $40 to buy basic necessities, toiletries, a few changes of clothes, instant coffee, and simple food items. Tommy showed him the apartment, a sparse but clean space that felt like a palace compared to the homeless shelter where Marcus had been staying sporadically over the past weeks. As evening approached, Marcus found himself standing at the window of his new home, looking out over the Cincinnati skyline. For the first time in months, he had a job to go to on Monday morning, a roof over his head, and a purpose beyond his own despair. He picked up his phone and stared at the contact information for Sarah's sister, Linda. Emma and Jake had been staying with her family in Columbus, and Marcus knew he needed to call them. But what would he say? How could he explain what had happened to him, what had almost happened, and what he hoped might happen next? The phone rang 3 times before Linda answered. Marcus? Oh my God, we've been so worried about you. The kids have been asking... I know, Marcus interrupted gently. I'm sorry, Linda. I'm so sorry for everything. Is there any chance I could talk to them? There was a pause, and Marcus could hear muffled conversation in the background. Then Emma's voice came through the phone, tentative and hopeful. Daddy, are you okay? We heard you were sad. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling tears that were both bitter and sweet. I was sad, sweetheart. Very sad. But I'm feeling better now, and I miss you and Jake so much it hurts. We miss you too, Daddy. When are you coming to get us? Marcus looked around the small apartment, calculating how he could make space for 2 children, how he could create something that felt like home rather than just shelter. Soon, baby. I have some things to figure out first, but soon. Can you and Jake be patient with Daddy just a little bit longer? After he hung up, Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the events of the past 24 hours. This time yesterday, he had been planning to end his life. Now he was making plans for a future that included his children, a job, and the possibility of happiness. His phone buzzed with a text message from Pete. Remember, son, you don't have to hit a home run tomorrow. Just step up to the plate and make contact, 1 swing at a time. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he had managed in months. Tomorrow was Saturday, and he would spend it preparing for Monday's new beginning. He would buy groceries, organize the apartment, and start mentally preparing for the conversation he would need to have with Emma and Jake about their mother, about his mistakes, and about the family they were going to rebuild together. The work would be hard. The grieving process would continue. There would be difficult days ahead, moments of doubt and struggle and financial stress. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt ready to face those challenges. He wasn't facing them alone anymore, and he wasn't facing them without hope. Outside his window, the lights of Cincinnati twinkled in the gathering darkness, a city full of people who got up every morning and tried their best to take care of their families, to do honest work, to find moments of joy in the midst of ordinary struggles. Marcus was ready to rejoin their ranks. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the parking lot of Rodriguez Construction at 6:30 in the morning. lunch cooler in one hand and hard hat in the other, watching his breath create small puffs of vapor in the cool October air. The work had been exactly as Tommy had described, hard, physical, sometimes heartbreaking as they helped families salvage what they could from flood-damaged homes. But it was also deeply satisfying in a way that Marcus had forgotten work could be. There was something profoundly meaningful about taking a house that had been destroyed by circumstances beyond anyone's control, and methodically, carefully, patiently, rebuilding it into a place where a family could feel safe and happy again. Every wall they framed, every floor they refinished, every room they restored was a small victory against chaos and loss. Marcus had thrown himself into the work with the intensity of someone who understood that this job represented far more than a paycheck. It was proof of his ability to contribute something positive to the world, evidence that he could be reliable and skilled and valuable. His co-workers, a mix of experienced tradesmen and younger guys learning the business, had initially been somewhat wary of the new crew member who Pete Rose had personally vouched for. But Marcus's work ethic and attention to detail had quickly won their respect. "Morning, Marcus," called Joe Sullivan, the crew chief who had become something of a mentor over the past few weeks. "Ready for another day of making miracles happen?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, and he meant it. The house they were working on that day belonged to the Martinez family, a couple with 3 young children who had lost nearly everything when the Ohio River had overflowed its banks in April. The flood had reached 4 feet into their first floor, destroying appliances, furniture, photo albums, and countless irreplaceable memories. Insurance had covered some of the damage, but not nearly enough, and the Martinez family had been living in a cramped apartment for 6 months, while they saved every penny they could toward reconstruction costs. Marcus had met them on his first day on the job, and something about Maria Martinez's determination to provide a stable home for her children had resonated deeply with him. She reminded him of Sarah, not in appearance, but in that fierce maternal protectiveness that would move mountains to ensure their children's well-being. As he worked that morning, installing new drywall in what would become the youngest Martinez child's bedroom, Marcus found his mind wandering to his own children. Tonight was the night. After 3 weeks of preparation, of proving to himself and to child services that he could provide a stable home, Emma and Jake were finally coming back to live with him. The apartment above Tommy's office had been transformed over the past weeks. Marcus had used his first paycheck to buy bunk beds for the kids, a small dining table, and curtains to make the space feel more like home and less like temporary shelter. Pete had donated a television and some books, and Linda had promised to bring Emma's art supplies and Jake's baseball equipment when she drove the children down from Columbus. But more than the physical preparations, Marcus had been working on himself. He had started seeing a grief counselor that Tommy's insurance helped cover, learning healthy ways to process his loss and pain. He had attended a support group for widowed parents, where he met other people who were navigating the impossible challenge of single parenthood after losing a spouse. Most importantly, he had begun to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting Sarah or moving past his grief, but about learning to carry it in a way that didn't prevent him from being present for his children. The counselor had helped him see that Emma and Jake were grieving too, and that they needed a father who could acknowledge their pain while still providing stability and hope. "Daddy." Marcus looked up from his work to see Emma running toward him across the construction site, her face radiant with joy. Behind her, Jake followed at a more measured pace, but Marcus could see the relief and happiness in his son's eyes as well. Linda was walking behind the children, carrying 2 suitcases and wearing an expression that mixed concern with cautious optimism. She had been skeptical when Marcus first called to say he was ready to take the children back, and rightfully so. The last time she had seen him, he had been a broken man, barely capable of taking care of himself. Marcus set down his tools and opened his arms, catching Emma in a hug that seemed to restore something vital that had been missing from his life for months. She felt bigger than he remembered, and he realized with a pang that she had been growing and changing during their time apart. "I missed you so much, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "I missed you too, Daddy. Are you all better now?" It was such a simple question, asked with the directness that only children could manage, and Marcus found himself searching for an honest answer that an 8-year-old could understand. "I'm much better," he said. "I'm not all the way better yet, and I probably won't ever be exactly the same as I was before Mommy got sick. But I'm strong enough now to take care of you and Jake, and that's what matters most." Jake approached more cautiously, and Marcus could see his son evaluating him, trying to determine if this father could be trusted not to fall apart again. Marcus knelt down so he could look Jake in the eyes. "I'm sorry I sent you away," Marcus said. "I thought I was protecting you, but I know now that I was wrong. Families are supposed to stick together, especially when things get hard." Jake studied his father's face for a long moment, then nodded gravely. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" Marcus felt the weight of that question, understanding that Jake was asking about much more than just their immediate circumstances. He was asking whether their family could survive the loss of Sarah, whether Marcus could be trusted to be both father and mother, whether they could find happiness again after so much pain. "We're going to be okay," Marcus said firmly. "It's going to take time, and there are going to be difficult days, but we're going to be okay. We're going to take care of each other." Linda approached them, still carrying the suitcases. "The apartment looks nice, Marcus. Much better than I expected when you described it on the phone." "It's small," Marcus admitted, "but it's ours. And it's temporary. I'm saving money for a bigger place, somewhere the kids can have their own rooms and maybe a little yard." "It's perfect, Daddy," Emma said, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Can I see my bed? Can I put up my drawings?" As they walked up the stairs to the apartment, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. The space that had felt adequate when he was living alone suddenly seemed cramped with 3 people in it, and he found himself seeing it through Linda's critical eyes. The mismatched furniture, the bare walls, the tiny kitchen. But Emma's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "It's like a tree house," she exclaimed, running to the window that looked out over the construction yard. "I can watch you work from here." Jake was more reserved, but Marcus could see him mentally cataloging the space, figuring out where his things would go, how the 3 of them would navigate the close quarters. On the small table, Marcus had set out photo albums that Linda had brought, pictures of their family from happier times, images of Sarah that he wanted the children to see every day. "I know it's not much," Marcus began, but Linda interrupted him. "It's clean, it's safe, and it's obvious you've put thought into making it work for the kids. That's what matters." She paused, looking around the small space. "But Marcus, are you sure you're ready for this? Taking care of 2 children by yourself in a new job, in a new place?" Before Marcus could answer, Pete Rose appeared in the doorway. Marcus had asked him to be there when the children arrived, knowing that having Pete's steady presence would help ease the transition. "Well, look who's here," Pete said with a warm smile. "You must be Emma and Jake. Your dad's told me so much about you both." Emma, who had never been shy around strangers, immediately approached Pete. "Are you really Pete Rose? Daddy said you used to play baseball." "I did indeed. And your daddy tells me that Jake here is quite a ball player himself." Jake perked up at the mention of baseball, some of his wariness fading. "I play shortstop. Well, I used to. I haven't played since." He trailed off, the unspoken "since Mom got sick" hanging in the air. "Well," Pete said matter-of-factly, "the Little League season is over for this year, but there are indoor facilities where you can practice during the winter. Stay sharp for tryouts in the spring." What do you say we go throw a few balls around while the grown-ups talk? As Pete led Jake outside to the small courtyard behind the building, Marcus found himself alone with Emma and Linda. Emma was already arranging her art supplies on the table, chattering about the picture she wanted to draw of their new home. "She's resilient," Linda observed, watching her niece with affection. "They both are, actually. But Marcus, they've been through a lot. Emma still has nightmares sometimes about the night Sarah went to the hospital for the last time. And Jake blames himself for not being able to make his mom feel better." Marcus felt a familiar stab of guilt. While he had been drowning in his own grief, his children had been dealing with trauma and loss that they were too young to fully understand. "I should have been there for them." "You couldn't be," Linda said gently. "You were falling apart yourself. But you can be there for them now, and that's what counts. Just be patient with them, okay? And be patient with yourself. This isn't going to be easy." That evening, after Linda had driven back to Columbus and Pete had returned to his own home, Marcus found himself sitting between his two children on the narrow couch, reading aloud from one of Jake's favorite books. Emma had fallen asleep with her head on his shoulder, and Jake was fighting to keep his eyes open, exhausted from the emotions of the day. "Dad?" Jake said quietly. "Yeah, son? Are you going to be okay if we have bad days? If we miss Mom really bad and get sad?" Marcus set the book aside and pulled Jake closer. "I'm going to be okay. We're all going to have bad days, me included. Missing Mom isn't something we're going to stop doing, and that's okay. She was too important to us to just forget about. But we can miss her and still be happy sometimes. We can miss her and still take care of each other." Jake nodded, seeming to understand. "I'm glad we're back together, Dad." "Me too, son. Me too." Later that night, after both children were asleep in their bunk beds, Marcus sat at the small kitchen table and looked through the photo albums Linda had brought. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, family vacations, and ordinary Tuesday evenings. Sarah smiling, laughing, holding their babies, helping with homework, cheering at Jake's baseball games. He found the picture he was looking for. The family photo from last Christmas that he had carried with him on the bridge that terrible night weeks ago. In it, all four of them were gathered around their Christmas tree, faces bright with genuine happiness. Sarah was wearing the necklace he had given her. Emma was holding up a drawing she had made, and Jake was grinning in his new Reds jersey. Marcus traced Sarah's face with his finger, feeling the familiar ache of loss. But this time, the pain was accompanied by something else. Gratitude. Gratitude for the years they had had together, for the children she had given him, for the love that continued to sustain him, even in her absence. "I'm trying, Sarah," he whispered to the photograph. "I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be, the father our children deserve. It's hard, and I make mistakes, but I'm trying." Outside his window, Cincinnati slept under a blanket of stars. Tomorrow, Marcus would wake up early and go to work, helping another family rebuild their home. Emma would draw pictures and chatter about everything she saw. Jake would practice his throwing motion in the courtyard and maybe smile a little more readily. It wasn't the life Marcus had planned, but it was a life with hope in it. It was a life where a man could fall down and get back up, where children could lose their mother but still have their father, where strangers could become friends and offer exactly the help that was needed at exactly the right moment. Marcus rose. He had started thinking of himself that way after Pete's intervention, as a small tribute to the man who had saved his life. Looked at his sleeping children and made a silent promise. He would be present for them. Not perfect, but present. He would work hard and love them fiercely and teach them that setbacks didn't have to be permanent, that families could be rebuilt, that hope was always possible even in the darkest moments. In the distance, he could hear the whistle of a train crossing the Ohio River, carrying passengers and freight toward destinations unknown. The sound reminded him of possibility, of movement, of the truth that every day offered a chance to make progress towards something better. Marcus closed the photo album, turned off the lights, and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities. And for the first time since Sarah's death, that felt like a promise rather than a threat. The man who had once stood on a bridge ready to end his story had instead chosen to begin a new chapter. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be the same as what came before, but it would be real and honest and filled with the kind of love that makes ordinary miracles possible every single day. In the morning, Emma would draw a picture of their new home, with all three of them standing in front of it, holding hands and smiling. And when Marcus saw it, he would remember Pete Rose's words from that rainy night. You don't succeed by swinging for the fences every time. You succeed by making contact, by moving the runner forward, by playing one pitch at a time. One day at a time, one moment at a time, one small act of love and courage at a time, Marcus Rose and his children were building something new from the ruins of what they had lost. And it was going to be beautiful.